Tanzania. This is really cool. Nigeria. Will we be able to receive a recording of this call after? I will check with the ANF team and then confirm. We have hi from Egypt, someone else from Nairobi. Or in the meantime, I'll give just one more minute before we begin. There's a poll that we request you to fill out in the beginning before this session, just so we can get a sense of where you're at before we jump into the session. And then at the end, we'll have a survey as well before you jump out of the call. So here's the poll. You should be able to see it on your screen right now. So take a few seconds to fill it out. Please fill out the poll. We encourage you to do that because it's going to help us meet your needs during this fireside chat. We've been preparing, we're excited, and we just want to get a sense of where you're at. This is Master Podcasting with Adelle Onyango, just in case you needed the reminder of which room you're in. Or there's in the chat, there's a response, so you'll be able to find the live stream on YouTube to this session, which you'll be able to then access afterwards. All right, thank you. Thank you for filling out the poll. I would like to welcome you all to this session of the ANF Academy. Thank you for being here. It's on Mastering Podcasting with Adelle Onyango. So the structure of this session will be that we'll begin with a conversation between myself and Adelle, and then we'll have lots and lots of time afterwards to field any questions that you may have. We're going to make heavy use of the chat box and of the Q&A box as well during the Q&A section. So during the fireside chat, feel free to drop your comments in the chat, your reflections, and so on that you'd like to share with the room here, with everyone who's participating. But remember that we will have a dedicated Q&A section segment after the chat with Adelle. So I would like to begin by introducing myself. My name is Melissa Mbugwa, and I'm the East Africa lead for partnerships lead at Radio Workshop. Radio Workshop amplifies African youth voices by providing training on audio storytelling to young people across the continent. This is for podcasts and radio, and distributing these stories through community radio stations locally, as well as podcast globally. I also co-founded Africa Podfest. We were the proud hosts of Africa Podcast Day in 2020, 21, and 2022. Africa Podfest was a community initiative that brought African podcasters together and the people who were interested in supporting this interesting, exciting medium. We sparked investment in the African podcast ecosystem, sparked connections, and shared learning. And so I'm very excited to be able to have this session, to be hosting this session with Adelle, who is someone who's been in the podcast game for as long as I have, I think. In the very first Africa Podfest event, Adelle was in attendance in Nairobi. This was, I think, 2019. And so it's been very exciting to watch Adelle's podcast career. And also previously, I also have had the privilege of being able to witness her career in radio prior to podcasting. So I will read out her bio for you, just so you have a detailed sense, a very strong sense of what Adelle can provide and bring to the table in this fireside chat. I'm sure most of you, if not all, have already heard of Adelle, being a pioneer in the African independent media space, and podcasting specifically. So Adelle Onyango is a Kenyan media entrepreneur, poet, published author, and women's rights activist who's gained international recognition for her efforts to empower African women and youth. She's been celebrated and recognized by many organizations, very credible organizations internationally and counting. So she's been named, for example, one of the 50 most influential women shaping Africa, top 100 Kenyans, top 100 Africans, icons of change, Africa Youth Awards, 100 most influential young Africans, 100 extraordinary African women, and top 100 inspirational and innovative women in the world. So Adelle's impact is global and quite strong and very well recognized. Adelle has over 10 years of experience in the radio industry, where she began her career as a drive show host on 1FM before she joined Kenya's leading media house, which is Radio Africa Group, as a presenter and producer at Kiss FM. After her 10 years of experience in radio, in 2019, she departed from traditional media and founded Legally Clueless Africa, which is a new media empire that amplifies African stories through its audio podcast, video series, and tour series. So you might have interacted with all or any of these channels. This platform focuses on sharing African women's stories and fosters wellness opportunities through group therapy sessions and wellness talks. Welcome, Adelle.
Hi, sorry, there was a bit of a lag there. How are you?
Welcome.
Hi,
Very cool.
everyone. Thanks, Melissa. That was such a wonderful intro, and I'm so excited. We have people from very many different areas. I was checking out the chat when you were doing the intro, and so yeah, I'm very excited to be here with you guys today.
Exactly, I'm so excited as well. So Adelle, I've had the privilege, like I was saying earlier, of watching your career since the very, very beginning, like from your first radio role. And I personally see you as an artist who's building a platform as well. I see you as a storyteller whose medium is the spoken word. And then what you've done in your entrepreneurial practice is to create a platform for other people to also tell their stories and be heard, be seen, and connect with each other. So am I correct in this thought in describing your career?
Yes, I think you are. I think you are. And I think there's the element of, especially if we're creatives and just honestly, humans in general, we're made up of so many versions of ourselves. So I always feel like in different seasons, there's a different woman in me who's steering the ship. So in our formative years as Legally Clueless Africa, it was really like the businesswoman, like project, like trying to build sustainability and all of those things. But I have felt from last year or like a year and a half, the artist has come back and is like taking over the role. So yeah, I think I'm all of those things, and it's just a different woman in me steers the ship in different seasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful way of describing your journey. You've been podcasting independently. You've been doing your work in media independently for 6 years now, if my math is correct, since 2019. And one of the things that I've noticed people get very surprised by and impressed by is that when they realize how hands-on you've been in producing your shows. You're the producer, marketer, host, engineer, even I would say, like sound engineer. And a lot of people are like, how their minds get blown. So maybe we could begin by you
Yeah.
sharing with everyone in this room what systems, how on earth did you do it? Did you do it in the beginning when you were alone? And what systems did you put in place to make sure that, it was possible and it worked?
Yeah, so of course I had the benefit of 10 years in fast-paced traditional media. The first radio station I worked for was like small and just starting up in Kenya. And so like we're such a small team. And to be honest, in university, I did do journalism, but my concentration was public relations. So I only did like one radio course by mistake. And so I didn't have the skills of like editing and all of those technical skills, right? So my first radio job, I became very close friends with my producer. I was doing the drive show and I learned everything about like cutting up audio, etc., running the
Right.
desk. And then when I moved to Kiss FM, I started up on mid-morning and a weekend show, and then I was doing breakfast and a weekend show. And breakfast obviously is more fast-paced. You have so many adverts, you're interviewing, you have a co-host you have to manage. And I was the driver of the show, which meant I'm sitting behind the desk. So I'm putting up all the knobs, I'm answering calls, and like in 3 minutes, I would be answering a call and uh, and editing it, like while you're listening to the Nicki Minaj song or whatever, like I'm talking to this listener who wants to talk for 10 years and trying to like get them to be succinct so it's easier for me to edit. Then I'm editing, then I'm flighting it, then I'm talking, I'm reading my prep sheets. So I think that really prepared me.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning, we had only our flagship podcast for a long time. And I was recording all of the different African storytellers who would come on. So the Africans would come on and share stories of their lived experience. I was editing, to be honest. I love editing audio. Like I love it so much. It's so wonderful, right? And I still actually do the editing. Well, most of it still.
Yeah. Oh,
And I was editing because of the rollout and like I think my love for maybe even just PR and communications. I'm very hands-on with what are our colors? What does the brand look like? What's the font? How do we cut things up? And this was like before we really had our hands on AI. So you're like listening to an entire episode and trying to be like, okay, this is the hot part. This is the hot part. This is what we need to cut for
yeah.
socials. But then it became very obvious that I would need to trust other people if I wanted to scale, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I needed to be pitching, but you want the business to be as automated as possible, and automated not in terms of like robots, but like these
Yeah.
systems. And if I'm sick, that doesn't mean you don't get a show, right? And
Right.
so I kind of had to trust people. And so now we have somebody who does the event side, and basically I'm just approving. So like a lot of our wellness talks, I can just show up and like to say hello and leave, or just fulfill the control freak in me. We have correspondents who record the stories. So, I'm very hands-on in terms of, because it's not interviews, you're holding somebody's story. So there's like a lot of, you have to do it with dignity, you have to do it with a safety, with respect. And these are not things you can learn in journalism school. So even when I'm looking for correspondence, I'm not looking for a journalist. I'm really looking for a human who has empathy, who can listen. And there's a lot of soft skills I'm looking for. And so then at least then now I record the stories that I kind of have the leeway to, like, if I meet you, Mel, I'm like, I think let me record her. It's been a long time since I was recording
Yeah, yeah.
people. And I think now it's just there is an idea we have of creative businesses that they're very glamorized. But I think it's so important to be very hands-on. Last year we ended with a huge interview. We had Lupita on our show, and it was a live event. We had a small audience. I and my manager, Wambare, we were like setting up the stage, like putting up our yellow banners and all of these things, because there's a specific way I want things to look. And to be honest, I'm not the business. I feel like we will still be as hands-on even 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Because it's your business. Like, if you're not hands-on, who's going to be hands-on for you, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of where we've gotten to now.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's a really comprehensive response. And from the back to just picking up on what you said about automation doesn't mean robots are doing the work, but there's so many aspects, behind the scenes. Like when you're pitching, you've got to write proposals, you've got to book meetings, you've got to manage finances, you've got to do your planning ahead for the year or several years in advance, and so on and so forth. What kind of systems do you put in place for that? You've mentioned already that on the creative side, you hired people with very specific skills. How about the, let me call it, operational side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been very blessed to be a creative who's also very passionate about business and money. I feel like it's not taboo to say that I love the choices that money gives me, be it in a personal space or for my business. It means that we can decide to fund whatever show we want to or whatever, or scale with more flexibility, right? And then there's the element of, again, 10 years in traditional media, one thing radio knows how to do well is to sell, because radio makes its money from that. And so we used to have to go for pitches. We used to have to proofread like the decks our sales reps would have, so that we can be able to say, okay, this works, this doesn't work. We're not going to be able to execute this. And so that really gave me an understanding of what the salesperson is going to be looking to pitch based on what clients want. It gave me the element of knowing how to sell when I'm behind the mic. And then knowing where creative and business can meet. Initially, what I did was just kind of have various sales people pushing the product. So when I looked at my shows at that time, it was just one. I looked at where the points of contact in terms of commercial contact, and what value and problems can I solve for clients, and who are the clients I want to work with, and then who's the salesperson who I think can represent me in that space. So I've had moments where I'd had like maybe 2 sales reps, 1 sales rep, and you kind of work on like a commission basis, because again, I think a lot of times we are scared to expand because we think we will need to have someone on retainer or kind of like have someone in-house in terms of a salary. But I think sometimes if you have that conversation with somebody who you know is good in sales, you can be able to say, hey, can we have a contract that's more commission-based, and this is how I want you to sell. And when I would get into those partnerships, I would then train the sales reps to understand what is the product, like listen to the show, this is where the advert is going to run, this is how we're going to do ABCD. So there's that element of sales. With accounting, it's just outsourcing. I really think right now it's become so much easier to not have, it's less of a liability, right? Like to outsource and have a partnership rather than to have someone in-house, especially when you know they're going to be busy probably 1 week of the month. Right. So how do you get them on and tell them this is how we'd like to partner? And there are a lot of smaller businesses, smaller startups now I would like to shout out one in Kenya. I don't think they have a footprint across the continent yet, but Ushuru have been incredible. And very transparent, and they really do help a lot of businesses. So that's with business, that's with accounts in terms of operations. And then I last year then got an advisory board because I realized, yes, I'm making all of the decisions, but I need to be accountable to other people because I'm very stubborn. So I don't want it to get to a point where I am the stumbling block for my business. And so I got people from different markets, from the States, someone who's strong in storytelling, somebody who's strong in impact work, somebody who is, the head of Trace East Africa is on our board, and someone from production in South Africa, to be able to hold me accountable when I do our 3-year strategy. They can be like, hey, have you done this? Have you done that? And I think you grow. I feel like all of this, if you're starting as a podcaster, you're listening to this and you're like, why is there a board? Why is there all of these things? Don't worry. Like, it's just like one foot in front of the other. When I started, I didn't think I would need all of this. This was a hobby, but a lot of this does help. A lot of this does help to streamline, especially if you want to build something sustainable. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I love that you've described, you're essentially, a CEO running so many parts, but, as the audience, we only get to see you looking glam and lovely, as you do, today. So
Yes.
I love how well you've articulated that, behind the scenes, there's a lot of preparation, and organization. What would you say to someone who perhaps doesn't, whose strengths are not in sales or administration or organization, but they have this big vision? What would you tell someone who's here, about, should they partner with someone? How do they go about, like, plugging the skills gaps they have, or even interest gaps? Not everyone's particularly good at or necessarily interested in being the CEO in a sense.
I think it's two things, and it just depends on where you see yourself. So the first
Mm-hmm.
one is it's so important to walk through life with a curiosity, right? I
Yeah.
think if you're humble enough, there is nothing in this world that you can't learn how to do. Like absolutely nothing. And especially if you want to build something sustainable, I think there's a base level of knowledge of certain things that you have to be curious enough to learn. That's one. But the
Mm-hmm.
other side is to partner with people. I remember when I was in uni, and like very many of us, the pocket money my mom was giving me was not enough.
Yeah.
And so I started an open mic event, and I knew at the time my business skills weren't as strong. So I partnered with a friend who was also in uni with me, but she was studying a more business aligned course for us to do it together. So I think a lot of times we look at partnership, or like even networking, we look at it as networking out, but like peer-to-peer networking and collaboration really goes a long way. And you would be surprised if you put it out there, how many people would want to work with you on something.
Yeah. Oh, great. That's great. So would you say then that for podcasters, or for, yeah, because we're talking about podcasters here, not everybody's podcast is necessarily, not everybody starts out, including yourself. You mentioned that when you started, it was a hobby, you had left radio, you were in this experimental space.
Mhm.
So at what point in that journey did you realize or decide, oh, this is going to be a business venture and it's going to be this huge platform? Or did that happen organically, or did you have to then make the decision and then, roll that out?
I think I was, even when it was a hobby, I was building it to be sustainable in terms of content. But I think when the lights went on was, I think, 40 something episodes in, when we made
Mm.
we had our first advertisers. And that's when I was like, what? I can charge for this thing. Like, this is fun. Who doesn't wanna earn from the thing they love doing?
Yeah.
And I think that was when I was like, oh, okay, I need to get ahead of this. Like, this was a people jumped on. And then I was like, oh no, I need to be very intentional. I need to like build and keep building. And I think even like when we added the tour, we went on our first tour across Kenya, which was funded by Africa No Filter. They were our partners for that. And
Yeah.
when that happened, I think that was 2021, I immediately started dreaming of our East Africa tour that we did last year with Mastercard Foundation.
Yeah.
And then we'd gone to Zimbabwe, we'd gone to Paris. So I just started like when I see a project or like something that I want us to achieve and then we achieve it, I'm like, that light switch that went off when we got our first advertiser happens again. And I'm like, oh, hang on. So, okay, bigger. And
Yeah.
so that's, I think that's when it started, but like that moment keeps happening on this journey.
Right. So it's about not being afraid to evolve and expand and respond to, where you are. It's not necessarily about having this fixed ambition in the beginning. That's what I'm hearing from you. It's about flowing and expanding as you go.
Yeah,
That's
100%.
really great advice. Yeah, that's really great advice, which I rarely hear from a business sense, that just kind of expand as you go. People normally think of business as like this closed square. You have to have a strategy. You have to have thought about your 5-year strategy in advance,
I think that used to happen, but the world we live in and like new media is so dynamic that even for us, like our new show was not part of our 3-year strategy. But I was like, it makes sense now, so we're going to do it now. And you shouldn't lock yourself. And things change so fast in new media. It's like 1 year is such a long time. So much can happen.
Yeah, exactly. Especially nowadays, the change is happening in every aspect, in the technology, audience interest, global events, the structure even of the media ecosystem is changing. Yeah, so you've got to be more dynamic in your approach. So you've done related to this actually. You've mentioned that you've already mentioned that sustainability for you was from the very beginning you were thinking about content sustainability. How do you then maintain this through line? Because that's the one thing, no matter what's changing and how many changes are happening, you need to keep going. And that's what sustainability means. Like, can you keep doing this forever? How do you then view sustainability? Most people think of it as financial only or financial first. But what's your take on that from your experience?
I think in podcasting, I like to think of sustainability as content. When you are in a position like me and kind of like the partnerships we've been able to have, most of the times when podcasters talk to me, the first thing they're asking is like, how do I make money? And somebody's in like episode 10 or even episode 20. And I'm just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We don't know if the product is stable enough to even have any commercial content or sponsor attached to it. Like, let's take one step at a time. So the first thing I always like to think about is the content. And, there are a couple of questions that you can ask yourself to begin with. Like, I genuinely love the shows we make. Like, I personally, and I'm always just like, if nobody else listens, I will. Personally, I will. And that's like a very big part of it because it's like, do you do you see yourself doing this even when there's no money coming in? Are you that interested or that passionate about this thing that you want to be doing, right? And then the other thing is like to really break down the idea, what it looks like in a number of episodes, right?
Right.
Is it maybe you thought it's an entire podcast, but it's 3 episodes. So it's time to step back and say, okay, I need to expand this podcast idea further, right? And then I think also with content, it has to allow you to evolve, right? So if you started a podcast that is about life in university, what happens when you graduate? You know what I mean? Like, then it's just like, hey guys, I've not stepped in a campus in years, right? So it's not really allowing you to like move past this, right? So you kind of have to break down your content like that. And then I think you also have to think about show where you have a co-host. I was forced in radio to have a co-host for quite a few shows. I think the only co-host situation I liked was my very first radio show. It was incredible. But after that, I didn't really think that dynamic was for me. And so now I just know I don't want to work like with a co-host. Can't do it. But if I did have a co-host, something that would affect sustainability is our shared responsibilities. Legally, what does it look like? Who owns the podcast? How is money shared? Who does the production? Who sources for guests? Who does what? Because if those things are not clearly outlined, it can affect episode 5.
Yeah.
And so I think before we even get to money, we have to have those conversations. And before you get to other people's money, you also have to think about your own money. Because sometimes I find it a bit unfair if you're not putting even 1% of your miscellaneous budgets, right? Of your savings or whatever source you're coming from. I don't want to sound privileged, but if you're not putting, even if it's 100 shillings of your own money in your own podcast, but you want me to put 20,000 shillings of my money in your podcast, doesn't make sense. So even when we have the conversation on finances, you have to put in, and I tell you why. Once you start paying for certain things around your podcast, value thing, I don't know, psychologists can explain it better, but like something happens, all of a sudden you're like, ooh, this is serious because you're putting in money into it. And I think that's something that even as a podcaster starting up, you have to think about that.
Yeah, definitely. I love what you said about you've got to invest your own money. All the things you're looking to get, are you also willing to invest? Because you're investing so that you can then you're creating value with your show, which is why it needs to be sustainable and keep giving so that you can also get back in abundance from the investments you're putting in, from what you're planting, to use the metaphor of like sowing and reaping.
Exactly.
Great. Moving a little more now into the branding aspect, which is connected to content and just the sustainability of the product, if I may call it that. You've got a tour series, the wellness therapy sessions. You've got several shows. Some you've experimented with, started, stopped, continued. But something that to me, I think makes you stand out is over the years is how authentic your work or your brand is to who you actually are, or rather it says, even for somebody I think who doesn't know you personally, just by watching you, even in your radio days, you've been very consistent about what you stand for, and therefore about the vibe that you emanate. And that comes through visually, it comes through in everything you say, the spaces you're in, the kind of events you put together, and the shows you produce, and all the work you produce, let me say, all the assets you produce. Was there, strategic or organized, intentional thought and organization around that? Like, did you work with a brand consultant, an advisor, a partner, or is that something that also sort of emerged just because that's how you roll from intention to action? And have you had to scale that or shift that brand aspect of your work as your business has evolved?
I think I'm very blessed. It must be like the public relations and comms classes and the work that I did before getting into radio. And I have a friend who always laughs at me because when I'm in the ideation phase of a show or a project, she says the first thing I start saying is how we are going to shoot it and what it has to look like. And that's even before I know where we're getting the money to do it, before I know even a name, right? Before I have even a name, I'm just like, yeah, it's gonna look like this, right down to the font, right? And I'm very hands-on in that regard. Because I think entity, right? They have to be recognizable. And I remember when we only had our initial flagship podcast show, it was purely Onyango. A lot of the other shows that we have do have hints of yellow and have something else added into it, almost kind of saying like, yeah, we were birthed, but like we're different-ish. But you can tie all of us really together. I think that's so important. But before you even get to the look and all of these things, I think it's so important to borrow from what even more traditional industries and businesses do. There's something called a brand heart, right? So like and it's made up of your mission, your vision, your purpose, and your values, right? And I think if you don't remember anything I've said today, just remember that, because it's so hard to find information on that. And when you do that exercise of figuring out vision, okay, what on my project or my brand or my business is contributing to building? And for me, it's one where Africans, there are more voices in the global African narrative. Africans are seen as being multifaceted, having modern, traditional, dynamic, urban experiences. That's, part of that vision. And the mission is like, what am I going to do every day to get as close to that vision as possible, right? And then that's where our show, we're going to ensure that we amplify African stories or conversations that matter to Africans in a dignified, respectful way, every day, with every show, with everything we bring up. And then you say, okay, that's great. What are the values that you're going to stand for? And this is so important because the businesses that are going to advertise on your podcast are doing this. That's how they land on podcast A versus podcast B. It's that Mel's podcast is aligned with our values, is aligned with our vision, is aligned, and she's part of our mission, actually. She's going to help us get ABCD. So you have to do that bit so that you can say, I'm only going to work with business A, B, C, D. So for example, integrity and it's very anchored towards uplifting Africans with a huge bias to African women. I can't accept advertising from betting companies, right? That's just never going to happen. It goes directly against one of the things we do, which is the wellness work, because betting, there's a clear link between betting. And so it makes it so much easier. First, you'll stop pitching to 10,000 companies and you will be like, yep, these are the 10. It's going to be so targeted. It's going to be so targeted. And there is a respect when you walk into a boardroom or you're at a networking event and somebody asks you, oh, okay, what do you do? And you say, well, I run a media company. We have a flagship podcast called ABCDFM, and we work to Even if it's entertainment, right? Even if it's pop culture, you have to understand what your mission and vision are, because those form the sentences in your elevator pitch, right?
Yeah.
Once you've done that, that's when you can go into, these are our brand colors, these are our fonts, these are, what our platforms look like. You can do all of those fun stuff. But that bit, the brand heart, is, I think, where everybody needs to start.
Yeah. Well said. And I think that's something. Do you have any recommendations of like tools where people can find this, or if they just Google brand heart?
This is the thing. You can Google brand heart. But I will repeat, your brand heart is made of your mission, your vision, your purpose, and your values.
Yes.
No one is going to tell you
yes.
what those are, right?
Yes.
What you will see is you will see examples of like a lot of these companies that we have known for years. So for example, like Nokia, a lot of their missions are their taglines. So you could use that as a reference, because Nokia was always connecting people. I can't remember what Safaricom, which is a telco here in Kenya, was or is. I can't remember. And anyway, bad example. We don't like them anymore. But like, you know what I mean? So you can, when you're doing your Googling, you can look at, I would say, don't only Google brand heart, but Google successful businesses across different industries and see what exactly do they stand for. See like the common threads, look at their taglines. That could inform what your mission could be. That could inform how you can attain your vision. But it's really such a, it's like a therapy session or like a self-reflection session of like, why do I want this podcast actually? Am I doing it because podcasting is the wave, or like I really want to use this as a tool to change something or to impact something, or even just to make us have a good time?
Which is, exactly. And that's an intention. I think that would be like a mission, right? People having a good time, giving people a good time. I ask that because a lot of times these bigger, highly visible brands will tend to have a brand book, or that statement, this is our vision, this is our mission, and it just sounds like, you might wonder, where did that come from? But it comes from, I just wanted it to be very clear that it comes from that introspection, and that nobody can really tell you what yours is. It's up to you to define it, and then you find the language to make it sound, nice and clean.
And you use it to know who to hire, who to partner with, even as individuals. Our correspondents, I take them through our brand heart, and I'm just like, you have to carry this when you're recording stories. You might look at what you're doing as being such a small thing, but all our operations are made up of many small things. If one of you is off or not aligned, you're messing us all up.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Thanks for that very practical guideline. Moving into your artistry, like I was saying earlier, I see you as an artist first, who then built a platform. And I suppose one could also say entrepreneurship is also an art form, but
Yeah.
that's a bit philosophical maybe. But how does your poetry, you're a poet, you're a performer, with the moth, I guess most famously, how does your art, your storytelling practice as an art, relate to your podcast, your podcasting work? And do you think that to become a great podcaster, one must somehow, one way or another, immerse themselves in some kind of storytelling practice?
I think first, and I had the people checking in, I'm going to assume very many of us here are Africans or from the continent or connected to the continent one way or another. Storytelling is at the core of what we do culturally. It's how we even learned lessons, right?
Yeah.
I think we are the best storytellers on this planet.
Yeah.
But hey,
Yeah.
I think the artist in me, how that helps with my storytelling is I'm very curious. I think artists are generally curious and are always seeking understanding, seeking alternatives, seeking clarity, trying something. There's a curiosity we have. And for me, my curiosity has always been around people, even away, like when we were in our initial months of running our podcast, Legally Clueless, the flagship podcast. I would have my recorder in my handbag with me everywhere. It didn't matter which country I was in, because I was always just so curious. I'd recorded stories in a taxi in Accra. Someone started talking and it was just so intriguing. And I was like, sorry, I have this podcast. No. Do you mind, like, pause the story, start again? There's a curiosity as artists we have. Mine is mainly around people and the human experience, right? And I think it helps me not center myself in my podcast. Like, I'm very aware that, yes, I created the space. Yes, I created the shows. Yes, the new show, I'm even in front of camera. This is the first time I'm in front of camera. Never ever done it before, right?
Yeah.
But it's others, because there's a curiosity that's I'm leaning into. And I think also your artistry helps you create different formats, right? And so even everything that I've shared here today, you can take it or you can study my blueprint. But I would encourage you, if you are intrigued, there's like an intrigue for you to rubbish everything I've said and create anew, please go for it. Because I think that's how I've gotten to doing what I'm doing, right? Is that curiosity of there must be a different way, right?
Yeah.
There must be a different format. There must be, we have to have more that we want to create as Africans. Like and it feels like it's either you're talking politics or you're talking sleaze and gossip and cloud chasing. And I'm just like, what? There must be, there's so much
in between. Yeah.
Where's all of that stuff, right? And
Yeah.
so I think it really helps me do that. The other thing I think the artistry helps me do is to understand that storytelling can come up in different formats, right? And so for me, it's, when I look at Legally Clueless Africa, I want to see my next book come out under Legally Clueless Africa. I want to see capsule collections of creations of shows. And really for it to be, yes, a network, but not a network like you've seen it before. It's just housing all of this artistry and in various forms, right? And the last thing I will say, the artist in me is such a dreamer. Like, oh my God, like I'm always just like, in my head. Like I'm always in my head. I'm laughing because I'm just remembering when I was in my head earlier today and yesterday. Just like yesterday, I was on my walk and I watched birds land on the electricity cables.
Mm-hmm.
And I just stood there and I was just like, oh, I think this is one of my favorite things. Like, I love
Yeah.
watching this. And it's
Yeah.
like, you're kind of always lost in your own world, which I think is really wonderful. And why that's wonderful is because it allows you to dream. So you are watching this and you have this podcast, and right now you're hell bent on it being a podcast only. And this was going to be 10 episodes. I'm only going to do 4 seasons or whatever. And I feel like just like step back, allow the artist to take over and dream. The space of creating should be respected. Just let it dream. Don't even think about like where the money is going to come from. Just dream the creation, and then is when you can start refining, right? And so that's my process in creating all the things that we've been able to do. I never really start from, I'm going to work with ABCD, and then no, it's like, how do I create, like, how do I first create and guard this artistic space? Even when I'm editing audio, I'll be like burning my incense and like being like, oh, this story, how does it really make me feel?
Yeah.
That is at the core. It's at the core of what you're doing. Don't hear me talk about the business stuff, which is really important, and then silence the artist in you. Please let that part thrive.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, beautifully said. Beautifully said. And finally, to close out this section before we can open the floor to everyone's questions, what's your support system for keeping your soul in the game, taking care of your well-being as you basically conquer the world?
Wow. Conquer the world. I love it. I think first I moved out of Nairobi into like the middle of nowhere. That helps because I am not a city person. So it allows me the silence that I need to create, to escape, to breathe, to be disconnected from the noise. And I work from home. I can edit. I can create. I can create in my space. That really helps. I think it's also important, right? Because if you're watching this and you are just starting, do not make this mistake I made. Initially, I would talk about my podcast and the challenges or things I was trying to figure out with people who had never even listened to a podcast, who had never even like, and it's like, I was the mad one because I was talking about milk to someone who's drunk water all their life and only water, and expecting them to tell me how to market milk or tell me how to make milk. It's just not going to work. And in those spaces, what happens is the person projects their fear onto your idea because they have no understanding of what podcasting is. So that's the mistake I made at the beginning. And I think there was a lot of self-doubt that came from me talking to people who I had no business sharing my ideas with them.
Right. Yeah.
So now I've really streamlined my my community. On a personal level, I have, one of my closest people I call when I have businesses that are driving me mad, or like an advertiser who's just like stressing me, but you can't scream at them. So you're just like,
yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah.
I have someone I talk to. I have another friend, I think we both know him, Dan. He runs Summer Box, which is a podcast incubator here in Kenya. And I call him my business therapist because I really go there when I'm just like, what the heck is this client attempting to do with me here?
Yeah.
And I think those spaces are really important. I have people who I bounce production ideas off of, like, oh, I'm thinking of this. What do you think? But even then, I do it very limited because nobody can really understand your idea but you. So you want to protect it and maybe only tell the people who you know will have a role. Like, you're going to be producing this, you're going to be, but there are tough times, I think, with podcasting, even with what's happening globally, right?
Yeah.
It can be hard to constantly get behind the microphone and be the self that maybe your audience knows, especially if you started off by showing only one side of you. What I would say is build a genuine community, because my podcast listeners are such an honest, genuine community, because I was that from episode 1. I think I was even crying in episode 1, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And so I've had episodes where I'm crying and there's an advert coming up. There's like paid partnership in about 4 minutes.
Authenticity. Yeah.
But that's life. That's life. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this, if you're in business or employed, there are days you've cried in the bathroom and gone back to your desk to like get work done. And so if you create a space that allows you to be all the versions of you, even when you're overwhelmed, like this week I recorded an episode and I was just feeling overwhelmed by all the things happening in Kenya in terms of governance. And I was like, what the hell? Create a space that is also safe for you, so that you don't feel like you have to become someone else or perform. And there are days that you just won't be able to do that, because life happens. So have your close people, but also make your podcast a safe space for you. Because guess what? Your humans connect this. I can talk for so long, but this is the last thing. Humans connect with things that are human. Your favorite song right now, the one that you've been going back to for 10 years, every time maybe you meet the love of your life or every time you go through a heartbreak, that song you carry with you in your back pocket is because it's real, it's human. So even your podcast, that's what people will connect with, not a performance or a caricature of what you think people want you to be. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful, Adelle. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being so generous with your insights and your experience. We will now move straight on into the Q&A section. We already have 2 questions, actually. So just a reminder to everyone in the room, please drop your questions in the Q&A box. Please don't drop them in the chat box, because what we're looking at for the Q&A is the Q&A box. So someone asks, they're anonymous, but they're asking, they say, thank you for your presentation so far. And there's a lot of valuable information that you've shared. Can you talk about the conceptualization and how best to structure a podcast?
Okay. What I will say about this in terms of the concept, I think I've touched on it a bit when it comes to the content, right? So it's like, are you interested in it to begin with? Is it sustainable, or is it a 5-episode thing? What you can do with your idea is like spider diagram it and try to get as many episodes out of it, right? So, or topics, not episodes. Try to get as many topics out of it. That will really help you understand whether this is a viable long-term thing. Is it a seasonal thing, or is it 3 episodes, right? And I'm not saying 3 episodes like that's a bad thing. Maybe it's a 3-episode thing and that's cool. But when you spider diagram it and you say, you might say, I've read this really great book. Let's say it's The Secret Lives of African Women, The Secret Sex Lives of African Women. Oh, it's so exciting. I want to do a podcast about this book. That will only take you maybe 3 or 4 episodes. And then you say, okay, I want to do a podcast that looks at books that are by African women. That can also take you only so far, or it can really be expansive if you look at, maybe let's not only talk about the books, let's schedule interviews with the authors. Oh, you know what? Let's look into books that became films as well. Find yourself in the film space as well. When you do that spider diagram and you start bridging and you're giving this circle, all of these legs of topics, then you start saying, oh, there is so much here for me to do, or there's so little. Or, hey, I hadn't thought about this other angle. Even if it's banter podcasts that are really big, I think it's so important to draw that topic, right? Even with banter, are you going to banter only about politics? Are you going to banter about pop culture? Is it an anything goes type of thing? And even if it's an anything goes, then what? Because sometimes if it's anything goes, maybe it's a topic I'm not interested in as a host. Like, I don't want to talk about medicine. I don't want to talk about. So what exactly is it? That's something you have to do. I think another thing after you've done that, because that's really introspection on your end, is to think about, what about the target audience? Who's my desired listener, right? And we're so lucky to be in a podcasting space because you get dynamic, like real-time analytics that are telling you who's listening, where are they from, man or woman, what device are they using, all of these things, right? And as you grow your community, you can find ethical ways to get your community to tell you more about what they like, or why they even like the podcast, what they don't like about the podcast, what other podcasts are they listening to. When you break down your target audience and you've done your topic, then you can start merging them. We used to do this in radio. And the last radio station I worked at, Kiss FM, people always used to say, you guys repeat songs. And we did. We repeated songs quite a bit. And the reason we repeated it is because our audience, we had a target audience profile. We knew her name, we knew her age, we knew where she lived. She's fictional. We knew where she lived. We knew that she's taking public transport, but she's hoping to buy a car. This is the type of guy she's kind of looking to date. This is where she shops. This is where she hangs out on the weekend with her friends. This is where she consumes her news. We had a template. So when we were talking about something, a topic could be trending, and we were a breakfast show, so you would think we talk about everything that's trending. No, a topic could be trending. Let's call her Jane for now. But we would ask, does Jane give a damn about this? And if she doesn't, it's can't. We're not going to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
So when you're conceptualizing your show, do the topic thing first, then do the target audience, and keep coming back. Because what I've found is, look at your analytics and be like, is the same person I thought I was targeting? Are they the ones who are really? Because I thought we were only speaking to women, but now we have a really growing number of men. And I'm like, okay, we need to figure out how to understand, why are the men here? What do they want? What do they like? And these are all things I think are important for you to think about, right? And the last thing I'll say on structure, think about features. Features work really well because they allow, what is it called? They allow for commercial content to sit on your podcast without it sounding like a disruption to the audience, right? So if you think of a feature, like, I'll go with like the book podcast, whatever you want to call it. If they had at every end of the episode or in the middle of the episode, they always had a feature where they would say a quote from a book, they would be able to sell that. They could say quotes of the week brought to you by Adelle's bookshop, brought to you by whatever. And so I, who love this quote, I still get my quote, and you're still getting your money, and it doesn't feel like it's a disruption. So features, I think, are really good when you're thinking about the structure of your podcast, I would say lean into features. That's my advice. But again, if it doesn't work for you, don't force it. I've just found that it works well for the listener, and it works well when you're trying to sell.
To sell. Oh, really good tip. Next question. We have about 13 questions so far, so we have quite a bit to go through. This is about the breadth of storytelling, or rather, sorry, the breadth of revenue generation. So, what do you think about the breadth of revenue generation through podcasting, like in the African context? And I suppose by breadth, they mean diverse sources of revenue.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I was going to ask. I hope I get that. Okay.
Yeah.
I think first we have a long way to go because podcasting is relatively young on the continent. But it's growing. Every industry starts somewhere. And I think you can monetize in various ways. What you need to remember and be very clear on is what is the identity of your podcast so that you're not sounding like one long advert. So one way is there are various platforms, and I know some that are African based are looking at dynamic adverts where you choose where the advert lands, right? And the platform kind of like picks where which adverts are coming, and you can pick if they're going to be at the beginning, mid-roll, or end roll. It's low. It's not too high in terms of the revenue it brings in, but it's constant, and you can't define it as passive per se, but you can, because either way there was going to be an episode. So why not, right? I think also which is my favorite way, because it's the least disruptive to your podcast's show identity, is to pitch the same way radio goes out to find advertisers. It's the same way you go armed with your analytics, you go armed with your mission, vision, values, purpose, and your value may not only be streams, but it could also be that you are a respected voice in whatever topic you're talking about. So there's that value you're bringing if a brand aligns with you. And it could also be that you have an engaged community. People always look at streams and like you want millions of streams.
Numbers.
But sometimes, sometimes the millions aren't really, they're here for the gossip and they're out. They're not really like in it. Like if Adele says,
it's not a fan base. Yeah.
It's not a fan base. They're not engaged.
Yeah.
And they don't feel like they belong to a community. They're there to get something and go. I would rather then put a product if I know my product, I'm looking for a conversion of community, people to buy in, people to trust my product. I would go to the podcast that has 100 streams, but like from that 100 streams, they're there because they're like, Mel tells us ABCD about hair products, about beauty products, and we trust this girl. We know her, like whatever. She's never lied to us. That's an engaged community. So think about monetization in various formats. But as of now, I think the biggest bet to build sustainable income is to actually pitch your own podcast to advertisers. And if you're clear about where those pockets that they can sit on, even better, right? And then build things around your podcast that are business to client, right? So I don't think it can exist only as a podcast. So what are the other things? Is there a book? Is it a film? Is it events? Is it what are the other things around the podcast? So the podcast, I said this in our practice, the podcast is a gateway drug. There must be another way to say it. I've not found another thing, but like the podcast is the gateway drug. And then there are other things people buy into so that you're not only reliant on advertisers.
Yeah. Thanks, Bernard. I hope that answers your question. Next, we have a question from Sapi from Zimbabwe, asking, at what point in your journey did you know that it was time to build a team and formalize?
Oh, when I knew me doing everything became a liability is you don't have time to go for pitches, you're running behind on recordings. I don't even think it's a numbers thing. More traditional businesses will start telling you like, when you've hit this revenue, now you can add. I get that from a sustainability point, but I think it's more introspective. I just remember feeling so spent, like no energy. You're running after pitches. You have to do what's it called? Reports for previous things. You are innovating and trying to build what's the next. And you have to run and record 3 storytellers in one day because that's feeding the actual product. So if you're not recording, like then we have no episode. And so what are these other things we're doing anyway? And then you're sending messages to invite people to talk at your wellness talk. You are going for wellness, for the group therapy sessions. And I remember burning out. To be honest, I hired employee 001 from my bed because I was like, I'm actually sick. Like a doctor has told me things are going bad internally.
Yeah.
So and I remember hiring her. We were in the middle of a partnership, which meant that we had events. She went for all the events. I was like, personally, I'm on bed rest. I can't leave my bed. And so I think it's please don't wait to get to burnout like me. Just please look internally and there's signs. You feel stretched, you can't do it. And you might be looking at your revenue and saying, I can't sustain to what's it called?
Paying salaries.
To pay salaries for. Really just think about the value that person is bringing. If they're taking one thing away, the time that you're being gifted, I'm not saying put so many things that you also burn out afterwards, but it maybe will allow you to innovate. It will allow you to do something else. So there's always a value that someone is bringing. And if you can't pay salaries, there's always people open to collaborations to some extent. So introspect, but don't wait until you're dying to start hiring. Yeah.
So basically, you were stretched out, but your advice is not for people not to let themselves get sick, but to notice when the stretch starts, and then make some decisions there. Great, thank you. Next is Irene asking, what should the priorities be for a first-time podcast producer? I think you've touched on this about like content structuring, but I'll let you answer.
I think it would be that, and I'm not too sure. And then the only thing I'll add to that is just like improving your skill. My goodness, like take as many online courses as you can. If it's your production, start slowly investing in better equipment, better software. I would say that like you're always just trying to better yourself. That I think should be like top priority.
Top priority. And then Ada asks, what tips would you give to someone who has the idea but doesn't know where or how to start the production bits?
I would want to know what type of research you've done. When I had the idea, the first thing I did was do a Google search, right? And that's how I ended up with my first mic. It's actually in my office, but my first microphone that I still have to date. I literally started researching and finding, it means I can afford this thing. Granted, I did have the media background. I would want to say if you have the idea and you've streamlined it, research what you would need in terms of hardware. And then if there are free online courses, which we know, there's YouTubers giving tutorials on how to edit audio. There are free audio softwares. Get a microphone and just start playing around with it. Like, I feel like that curiosity is always so wonderful, of just like, say 1 sentence, 2 sentences and try and edit it. Play around in that field a bit more so that you can be comfortable in it. in the event that you're going to be doing your own production. If not, if you're not going to be doing your own production, it still goes back to research. So what are the studios around you? What are their costs, so that you can start building? If you're going to be outsourcing that, how much do I need to have every month to be able to afford this? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Abu Bakar is from Nigeria, says he works with Gender Mobile Initiative, which is an organization that works on eradicating SGBV and promoting intersectional gender equality. So they're thinking of trying to start a podcast to create more awareness. And so the question is, what would you advise us to do to make it engaging and relatable without dwelling too much on the sad realities in that space?
I would want to say, why are you starting a podcast, right? So creating more awareness on the issues we address. To who would you want them to know? And what do you think, since you're Africa-based, I believe, what do you think what's the gap when it comes to SGBV? And then the sad part of the stories, because I'm a survivor as well, the sad chapter of our stories is not the entire story. So what other parts of the story do you want to tell? I always say, like, and I don't know if it's wrong or right to say it in this forum, but like I always say, we're whole beings, right? As survivors.
Yeah.
I personally don't even do interviews anymore that are asking me to just focus on the trauma. I'm like, I've rebuilt, I'm whole. I can enjoy relationships and intimate relationships. Like, no one ever talks about that part when we talk about, especially African survivors. It's always just like the sad chapter. And so I wonder what your why is, and just understanding that there's like a whole range in the stories. Like, you don't buy into the white savior story arc that really only has to focus on the sad stories. Like, we are so much more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Maggie asks, when getting started, what promotional / SEO / marketing techniques can I use to make sure that my podcast will be found quickly? Say if someone is searching for topics related to what my podcast is about. So in short, how do I ensure that mine stands out?
So honestly speaking, what we paid for was a lot of social media advertising. That's and it was very consistent in terms, and it was very targeted to remember when I talked about our target audience, who we were targeting, right? And still is to date, actually. But it was always looking for ways to plug us into interviews, into other shows, like collaborations. I know when we were trying to get a lot of the diaspora market, we did crossover, like a podcast, hijacking someone's podcast, they hijack yours, and kind of you're swapping your audience. I wouldn't want you to think about it in a very traditional way when it comes to marketing, but also I would like you to just adjust your expectations, because the adverts just like ride under. What I've found to be more impactful is when there's compelling content. The word of mouth is out of this world. Our community members, very many times, it's like, my aunt told me about this, my girlfriend was listening to this. Or if you see people talking about podcasts online, they'll be like, oh yeah, you should check out this. I haven't paid that person to talk about Legally Clueless, but I've made sure my show talks to that person so intimately that they are inevitably going to be my ambassadors, right? And then it's also in the guests you have. Maybe every so often you can have a guest who their community will help boost your podcast a bit. Don't look at advertising in a very traditional way, but also know that it's slow, right? Because I think when you pay for your ads online, you think it's just going to be like
0 to
immediately up.
100. Yeah.
No, it's very slow. And the product, I think, is what is important. And then the non-traditional format. So I'm seeing people swapping their podcasts in the chat. Imagine if you did like podcast takeovers amongst your own podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Even if I have 50 streams and I have 50 streams this side, there's 100 people finding out about different things. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Daniel asks, on the aspect of authenticity, has the vision of your truth changed over time, or has it been clear from the beginning?
It's never
I guess the
changed.
question there is, it's never changed. Yeah. I mean, I know that, having followed your work from the
Yeah,
beginning,
it's
you've been
never
pretty
changed.
solid in the core. Yeah, yeah.
It's remained. I did my brand hat. My brand hat is so true to who I am. So my business, if it wants to retain me as an employee, has to align with what I want. There's many things we've said no to, so that it doesn't change that. So it's not changed.
Yeah. Okay. Kondwani asks, can you please let us know more about how to approach potential partners, whether it's other podcast funders or NGOs, to expand your podcast? I see Legally Clueless has a social impact initiative to it. So how do we get people to understand that vision and invest? Did you need a couple of episodes out, or did you do a few impact projects before to get them to see how beneficial the program would be? If it's in Zambia, I think if it's not a salacious podcast or opinion based, most people don't understand. So a creative nonfiction podcast isn't listened to so much, and I suppose their podcast is creative nonfiction. So how do you get people to understand what you're doing and your ultimate vision when it comes to partnerships, especially when you're doing something new, which you alluded to, how in the early days you were the only one podcasting at that scale? Yeah.
Yeah. First shout out. I really want to I've been to Zambia before, and I think Zambia there's so much. I'm very intrigued with where your country is going. So I've wanted to come back. I genuinely think sometimes we dwell so much on the people who don't understand what we're doing, and we forget the people who are aligned. I think number one, what I would tell you to do is do the brand heart activity, because it will help you see which NGOs, I think you mentioned, or which businesses or corporates are aligned with what it is you're doing, so that already you're not telling someone something that is so far removed from what they're doing, right? And you can speak to their comms pain points. You can speak to amplifying something that they're already doing. That's one. Number two, I think if you look at it on the other side of like, how do you, because you mentioned if it's not salacious, it's not getting ABCD. In terms of the audience, I think there is a way, there's an audience. I always said back when Facebook started, there was a Facebook group of, I'm not a cat, I don't love cats, so this is probably why I found it so intriguing. There were Facebook groups for cat moms and cat parents, and I used to be like, and you'd find like groups to date, you will still find groups for the most, cats are probably not niche, but like niche random things, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, there is an audience for whatever your podcast is. I think you being intrigued by that topic is already proof for me that this could work. So it's finding, where are those people? What do they do in Zambia? Where do they hang out? What are other podcasts that are similar to mine, or other shows, or other websites, or films they watch, etc.? So that then you can plug into those existing platforms for you to reach your target audience. But I think first, it doesn't sound like the brand heart is done. Once you do that, you can know which organizations are aligned with you. It'll be so easy, trust me. And then for your target audience, build up a profile and figure out where are they, what are they already, because they're there and they're consuming something already. What is that thing they're consuming, so that you can start watching and borrowing and collaborating even with those platforms.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just doing a time check. We have 4 minutes to our planned end time. So I just want to ask our audience and Team ANF if we can go on for maybe 10 more minutes. Please let us know in the chat if that's okay. In the meantime, we can get through Emmanuel, I think your question has been answered already. Justice asks, what challenges did you have in getting partnerships and how did you navigate through them?
The thing is about business, you don't even have time to think of something as a challenge. Challenge. Let me tell you, when you pitch, you get denied.
Yeah.
There's not even time to cry about it. Because guess what? The
Bills must be
deadline
paid. You need to move on.
Bills must be paid. You're just like, well, but I think it was I always find it hard to answer the challenge question because I don't view challenges as challenges, especially challenges that I know are in alignment with what I'm meant to be doing. It's just my thing. It's my this thing that you are calling a challenge is mine. It's just this part of my journey, right? Because I can't say pitching to so many people and they don't get back is a challenge. Because also that's their prerogative. They're allowed to say no to me, right? I just have to keep moving until I get to the yes. And then you pivot really quickly because sometimes you have to figure out if you're working in a low trust environment like Kenya, you have to figure out how do I make sure I get paid, in time. And it's to stick to your guns if you need 100% payment before, 50% payment before, adjusting for all of the things that are happening economically in terms of your rates. All of those things, I wouldn't say are challenges because standing up for what you know, like for me to do my job well and to make sure this campaign is activated well on my podcast, I need 50% before because of the production costs that come in. Me saying that is not a challenge. It's a fact. And then if someone doesn't want to adhere to that, I then have to say, hey, then I can't do this work because it's actually not practical. I can't do it. I can't. So I would say it's not a challenge. I would say you have to innovate for your market. Innovate what your payment terms look like. But part of business is pitching and hearing no and not taking it personally. Just saying, well, okay.
It's part of just incorporate it as part of the process, a natural part of the game.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that's a challenge. I find it hard to always answer the challenge question because I don't look at those things as challenges. Yeah.
Great. Renee asks, can Adelle tell us great places to look for podcast producers and editors?
Oh, I think that's beyond me.
That's what the NF community is for, right?
Yes. I'm pretty sure NF is better placed for that. I have no idea who I would flag in there or like if there's no, I wouldn't want to answer that. I think NF are the best. Yeah.
The community. Okay. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Godse asks, what advice would you give podcasters producing in native languages but wanting to connect across Africa? That's an interesting one.
Oh, I love that. I would like to know what is it, because it looks like are you from Botswana? Sounds like a Swana name. That's so yummy. I would love to hear a Swana or whichever language podcast. I think what I would do is I would have my core flagship podcast that is in my native language and that is targeting, let's say if it was Swahili for me, targeting Swahili speakers, etc. And then I would have capsule podcasts that would be, say, in English or in French, depending on which part of Africa you're trying to target, if it's Francophone or Anglophone Africa, that would bring in that audience for that specific thing. Because the first people who have bought into the native language podcast, you don't want to disrupt that for them, But if it's for bringing them in, which I think is important because it opens you up to a bigger audience base, I would have periphery capsule podcasts that are in English or are in Francophone or whichever region it is, or maybe you want to start a Swahili one. That's very interesting. I would love to know. That's what I would do. So that's how I've answered your question. But I would love to know which language your podcast is in.
Anonymous attendee asks, were you ever afraid to be accepted or received by your audience? For example, in my instance, I'm in the diaspora, and often I'm uncertain about how my target audience receives my work in Kenya, in my home country, Kenya. I initially set up my content as a way to bridge the gap and connect, but I'm finding I might be a bit delusional / might miss the mark a bit. So that fear of, does this make sense to the persona I've created? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, listen, every episode that I hit publish on, I'm always just like, now, or rather, like the bits of the podcast that I edit are my bits because I record my bits at home. So I edit my own voice and my own thoughts. And these are thoughts I've written in a prep sheet. So I've already like really analyzed what it is I'm saying. But still, when I'm editing it, I'm just like, what the heck are you saying? Who cares about this? Like, and I have to tell myself, that's just that inner voice that is carrying so much trauma or fear, and I believe whatever you say, because we all have different levels of privilege, right? But whatever you say is your lived experience. I can't argue with your lived experience, right? That is informing your opinion or whatever. I can't argue. What I can do is I can add perspective, right? And so I would say, like, your lived experience is valid. Because what you're attempting to do is to change who you are for your audience. Yet your audience is living a reality that's very different from yours right now. So even if you do that, you're not going to do that convincingly. I think stay true to who you are, your lived experience that is informing your perspectives. And if you really want to capture what people back home here in Kenya are thinking, have a feature where they can send in their thoughts and their opinions. So that's captured, but I would not say you change yourself. You can add their perspective.
Beautifully said. I agree. Maggie asks, she says, Adele brought up an interesting thing, which is ads. I personally hate those when I'm listening to a podcast. What is the downside of foregoing having ads in your shows? Does it really help to have ads? I guess the question is, must it be ads?
I mean, the downside is that you don't get paid, but I think how you should look at it is the two things I will say is, like, if you go the route that I said where you're pitching, then it means you are crafting the commercial content around the show's DNA so that the audience doesn't feel like it's an intrusion. That's one. But the other thing that I found quite interesting with our audience members is they celebrate all the advertising we get. And that speaks to the power of the community we've built. Like, so they see that as growth and a good thing for us. I genuinely find myself with YouTubers who I connect with and podcast shows that I connect with. I listen to a lot of true crime. When there's an advert, I'm just like, oh, I've got to stay and listen to this because I want my favorite podcast. The host's name is Vanessa. I'm like, I want Vanessa and her team to really like get value out of, like, I'm in. I'm locked in.
Yeah.
So you could go about it the way I've said, where you're pitching, but also if you build a strong enough community, they will support you. And you just, from a production standpoint, try and make the ads as less of a interruption as possible. But I think we should just be okay knowing they will interrupt because they're adverts. Like, it is what it is.
Yeah. Zainul Abidin asks, can you tell us more about inviting guests, especially those who are not in your city? And to which period should we start approaching brands, and what are the ways of approaching them? I think so. At what stage should you start approaching brands?
Yeah.
And how do you invite guests?
Let me start with the brand one. I
Mm-hmm.
think you approach them when you're ready to add value to them. And you could be ready to add value to them in episode 10. We stumbled on our first partnership when we were in episode 40 or something. But I think we were ready to add value to those brands from episode 20. So like it's when you know you're ready to add value, because what people trade is value. And so when you're clear about what that value is, then you're clear about what you're pitching, and it'll be clear, if you do it well, to who you're pitching to, that yeah, this person can add value to us. In terms of inviting guests, there's a lot of like digital platforms that you can use to record. I mean, even Zoom works pretty well. Goodness, I've forgotten the name of another one that I don't even know if it still exists, but that would use your phones in case the guest you invite doesn't have a laptop, etc. But I'm pretty sure you can just research on it. It uses smartphones as opposed to the laptop, right? In case you're recording people who are in remote areas or who just don't have access to a laptop. And you send them, be very dignified and respectful, and you reach out to them. If it's on social media, or if you meet up to them reach out to them on email, introduce the show, why you want to have them on, send them a breakdown of what you're going to be talking about before, work with their schedule, and then do the recording, and just maintain a high level of professionalism. And if they're not in your country, I say Zoom because everybody knows Zoom and it's very user-friendly. If you're looking at somebody who has some level of knowledge of these recordings, you could look into Riverside. What else have I used to record virtually? I forget the name because I've stopped doing the recording. So, but to be honest, Zoom and Riverside is such a great place to start because, like, one is very amateur friendly. Riverside is also pretty easy to know, but it's really geared towards helping you get the best audio quality. So I would start there.
Hedwig asks, how do you get the audience engaged or hooked if you're working with topics like climate change, which I imagine they're asking this because climate change can feel very out there.
I would say like you have to do the exercise of breaking it down. So I'd first ask, why do you think the audience needs to be engaged, right? And when it says audience, like audience is not your fellow people in like the development or NGO world who already know about climate change, who already know all of those stats. Like it needs to be someone who doesn't know this, doesn't know how it's affecting their everyday life. But I think if you do that topic thing and break it down, that's a great way to start understanding how you can break down topics. And maybe also do like not a round table, what would I call it? There's a word for it that's gone out of my head right now. But if you can bring in maybe 10 to 15 members of your desired audience members and workshop climate change, a focus group, that's it, to understand who you're talking to. Because I think sometimes you're talking at people and not to people, especially with development and global issue stuff. Maybe start there to understand how you can break down those topics.
Anonymous attendee asks, says, I've been doing a podcast and I want to take another step to approach sponsors or business partners. What I'm scared to do and don't know how to start is how to approach them and pitch. I suppose this is how do you just go, hello, I am Melissa, I have this podcast.
The first thing I would want to ask is, why are you scared? Because sometimes we can't solve for fear if we don't know what the fear is. And if you name it, then you can start navigating it? Is it fear of the unknown? Is it fear of rejection? What is that fear, first and foremost? And then be in spaces where these people are. If it's events, if it's networking opportunities, if it's conferences, actually put in your money to go for these spaces, and start getting to know who are the key members in particular organizations. And the pitch doesn't really happen at the event, but the intrigue happens. And so it's really just saying, this is so interesting. Oh, it's very aligned to what I do. This is what I do. Change contacts. And then the pitch happens afterwards. So I would say pay to be in those spaces, or very many of them are free as well. If it's conferences, networking spaces, if it's LinkedIn. But then I'm more worried about your fear. Like, we need to name it to understand what it is. Is it fear of rejection? Because it's going to be holding you back. Even if you go into those spaces, you're not going to talk to them unless we understand that fear. And so I think there's work you need to do there.
So it's more about the introspection than actually about the podcasting work.
Yeah.
Right. This next question from another anonymous attendee: how has AI improved pre and post production processes? And are there any AI tools you would recommend?
Because we have a lot of storytellers, not storytellers, correspondents, sometimes you're recording stories not in a studio setup. So for cleaning up of audio, we use the Adobe Podcasts tool. They have an AI, they've had an AI tool for, I want to say, over 3 years now, if I'm not wrong. And we were switched on from the beginning. The only problem with a lot of these AI tools, which I've been nudging the African tech community, it's not, they don't really understand African intonation. So I know right now they've added more of you have more control. So you can say you don't want the voices touched, but you want to remove only the background, which is helpful. But I just feel like we need to innovate those tools on the continent, because I know AI learns the more we feed it, but it's just, I still have problems with how it edits the African voice and intonation. So
yeah.
So that's one. And then there's one, I think, so we use AI as well. I think Opus, OPUS, for our video shows to know what are the clips that we need to cut for social media. So that has cut down a lot of our production time in that regard. I'm still in terms of my prep sheet, and even for the storytellers, because we come up with storytelling prompts, we don't really use AI for that because it's so personal and it's not so much work that we need to quicken that process. It's not like we have 10,000 shows we need to prep for in 2 days. So that we still do ourselves. A lot of the stuff in terms of our visuals, in terms of, okay. So we do use AI also to name the episodes and to create and repurpose the podcast. So from the transcript, what are some of the quotes we can get for social media sharing? But for prep sheets, I know very many podcasters use it for prep sheets. It's not something that we do because it's just so personal. Yeah.
Alade asks, how can I position myself for meaningful collaborations and confidently pitch my podcast? So this is about positioning and with limited metrics or visibility. So not yet a big show, but how do they position themselves?
I would say, okay, meaningful collaborations. I'm going to think that collaborating with other podcasters, be in those spaces, like you being here now, the chat is alive. Like, I hope you guys are swapping podcasts, like, hey, this is my podcast, they need to be like podcast episodes coming out of this particular show. I mean, this particular session. Be in community or group, not group, like workspaces that you know, or hubs that you know have incubations for new media practitioners. To be honest, our first tour, we needed to collaborate with hubs across Kenya, and we got connected to them from someone we were talking to at a hub here in Kenya called Baraza Media Lab. And they were like, oh, I know this person in Nakuru or in Mombasa. These are all towns in Kenya we were going to. And we were able to build collaborations with strangers because of one stranger who was in this physical space we were in, right? We really downplay that type of power that those community spaces have. So I would say think about that. Yeah, put yourself in those spaces repeatedly, because the people, your peers who you could collaborate with are seated right next to you. Sign up for those workshops, sign up for those talks, and try and make as many friends as you can in those spaces. And then even just email the podcasters. If there's a podcast that you have your eye on, you want to collaborate with, just email them or DM them. You'd be surprised. A lot of people in the creative economy are very open to collaboration.
Miso asks, oh, this is an interesting one. Take us through your pitch.
Oh my God, can I take you through my pitch? Because
I guess
don't even
the
know.
elevator pitch, the one line or the two line.
To be honest, what I can say is by the time I'm pitching to someone, I already know who they are and why they need to work with me, right? Our East Africa tour we did with MasterCard Foundation, and I knew they had a youth program. I knew I wanted young African voices. I knew that people in the development world only speak to each other. And I knew they wanted people outside of that world to know about them. I knew I wanted to tell a different arc of an African story, so away from the savior arc. And I knew that's a pain point for a lot of NGOs in those spaces. So my pitch is not only, I'm not coming to you selling what Legally Clueless Africa is, because that's a given that you would be talking about your numbers or your impact or your engaged community and all of those things. But my pitch is what I can do for you. And that means I've done my research on you, right? I'm not just talking to someone out of the fly. I think it's important to kind of like stalk the organizations you want to work with a bit and understand what are you guys aligned, right? Are you guys aligned first and foremost? Yeah, and then you because by the time you have an audience for a pitch, you have to give them everything. So you have a clear view of what it is that you're going to be doing for them and the pain point you're solving. So a pitch isn't only made up of me telling you Legally Clueless has been here for 6-7 years. We have this number of shows. We've done a tour. We've done that. That's okay. But like, it doesn't answer what are you doing for Melissa organization, right?
Yeah.
But I can say, hey, Melissa, it seems like you talk to African women and maybe we can help you bring in a wellness aspect by partnering with us on ABCD.
Yeah.
Now you're listening because it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we are aligned. This is what we're doing. We have been having a pain point, or together we can amplify this. So rather than take you through my pitch, I think I hadn't stressed on that point, is you're not only saying what it is you do, but like, how are you solving? And it requires a bit of stalking and a bit of resilience. For like our pitch for our East Africa tour, it took me 1 year. 1 year. I started end of 2022 and I got my approval end of 2023.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
And that's pitching. It's not one
Yeah.
session of pitching. You are continuously pitching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yero asks, Yero is a Gambian journalist based in Portugal, based in Lisbon. I'm interested in starting a podcast on migration, targeting African diaspora in Europe, but funding to get gadgets and basic capital remains a challenge. Any guidance in raising funds, for instance? I suppose this question is about what you need to get started, and should it cost? Yeah, what would it cost?
I think just start small. I feel like sometimes we see podcasters with like fancy gadgets and like so much, there are microphones that connect to your smartphone. And I actually bought one of them when I was beginning. I just don't know which box it is in. If the box was close, I would show you. And it's long and it's got two heads, so you can pin it on who you're interviewing and then connect it to your phone. There are apps now. I know Rode has a reporter app that you can use for recording, and there are quite a few others as well. And they give decent audio. I think when you're thinking about funding and raising funds for things, people normally give you money to scale something that's already moving. They don't give you money to start because that's very risky. There are very few people who give you money to start. So I would say look at those microphones, the recorders. I think in Kenya, the smartphone microphones, the time I got them, they were maybe less than 2,000 Kenya shillings, which is that 20 something dollars?
Dollars, yeah. Or just about give or take $20, yeah.
Yeah. And then the recorder we have, which is there's a Sony recorder that you kind of use almost like a reporter one, and it has a USB, so it just plugs directly to your laptop. I think that was maybe 3,500 shillings. That's just under $40, if I'm not wrong. So I think you need to look at, because you've not begun, at how you can start, because people normally give you funds to scale, not to start, because you want to see something that's moving or that's tried and tested a bit. And then you're like, okay, I can put money here. Yeah.
Yeah. And you want to get a feel of a good sense of what the thing is also. So, which is what, yeah. Okay. And now we have our final question from Hedwig. Can we quote Adele in regards to today's highlights? So can people quote you on the internet and elsewhere?
I didn't say anything too criminal, so please feel free. If this was another forum that was more political, I would have said no, but please feel free, because I think, especially as African creators, the more we share knowledge, the more creators we can get in the space, and then we can build the industry so it benefits everyone.
Yeah. Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much, Adele, and everyone for staying through. We've gone 25 minutes over. So thank you for being so gracious. Thank you, Adele, as well, for answering everybody's questions. We have a survey, just a quick one, take a few seconds to answer it. And in the meantime, I would just like to really extend thanks once again to ANF, Team ANF, for putting yet another gathering together, another masterclass, another learning session in the ANF Academy. Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Team Adele, Wambaire in the background. And thank you to everyone who's joined. Your questions have been really engaging. The chats have been vibrant, lots of exchange and learning happening, insights. Yeah, all the best to all of you in your podcast journeys. And remember, keep evolving, stay dynamic. I hope you've taken your notes, but the video is also on YouTube for you to access after this. Remember, brand heart. Adele mentioned that if you take nothing else from this, take the brand heart exercise with you. your why, your mission, your vision, your values, your purpose. And with that, once the survey closes, we will end the session. And I'd just love to say once again, thank you, everyone, and all the best to you all.